I'm Heather, and I never thought my own sister would seduce my boyfriend at her baby shower while I was serving drinks to her guests. But watching Derek slip his hand around Madison's waist while she giggled and whispered in his ear made me realize that blood doesn't always mean loyalty. What my manipulative sister didn't know was that losing Derek would lead me to my real soulmate, a Navy SEAL who doesn't take kindly to anyone who hurts his family. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning of Madison's baby shower in suburban Phoenix started like any other scorching July day, with temperatures already climbing toward 115 degrees at 8 in the morning. I stood in my cramped apartment kitchen, carefully arranging pink and silver cupcakes in white bakery boxes, my hands shaking slightly from the 3 cups of coffee I'd already consumed. I'd been up since 5, baking and decorating because Madison had specifically requested that I handle all the desserts for her celebration. Derek emerged from my bedroom wearing yesterday's clothes, his sandy brown hair still messy from sleep. At 26, he had the kind of laid-back charm that made people instantly comfortable around him, though lately I'd noticed he seemed more interested in his phone than in our conversations. We'd been together for 8 months, and I thought we were heading somewhere serious, despite his reluctance to talk about the future. "You really went all out for this," he said, eyeing the array of desserts covering every surface of my small kitchen. Pink macarons, miniature cheesecakes, chocolate-dipped strawberries, and a 3-tier cake that had taken me 4 hours to assemble and decorate. "Your sister's lucky to have someone who cares this much." I wanted to point out that Madison had never gone out of her way for anyone else, but I bit my tongue. Derek had only met my family a few times, and I didn't want to sound bitter or negative about my sister, especially on such an important day. Madison was having her first child, and despite our complicated relationship, I wanted to support her. "She's my only sister," I said simply, though the words felt heavier than they should have. Madison and I had a relationship built on unspoken competition and subtle undermining that had started in childhood and never really ended. She was 2 years older, naturally beautiful without effort, and had always possessed an ability to charm people that I envied. The Riverside Community Center in Scottsdale was already bustling with activity when we arrived at 10:30. Madison had chosen an upscale venue with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the desert landscape, and everything was decorated in her signature style, elegant, expensive, and designed to impress. White and gold balloons created perfect arches, fresh peonies cascaded from crystal vases, and a photographer moved discreetly through the space capturing every detail. Madison looked stunning, as always. At 7 months pregnant, she glowed with the kind of radiant beauty that pregnancy magazines featured on their covers. Her auburn hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders, her makeup was flawless despite the heat, and her flowing coral dress managed to be both maternity-appropriate and incredibly flattering. She was holding court near the gift table, surrounded by admirers who hung on her every word. "Heather," she called out when she spotted me carrying in the dessert boxes. "There's my amazing little sister. Everyone, this is Heather. She made all the incredible desserts you're going to be obsessing over today." Her smile was warm and genuine, and for a moment I felt guilty for harboring any negative thoughts about her motives. Derek helped me set up the dessert station while Madison continued working the room like the natural hostess she'd always been. I watched her laugh and pose for photos, one hand always resting protectively on her belly, and felt a complicated mixture of love, admiration, and something that might have been jealousy. Madison had always known how to be the center of attention, how to make people want to please her, and compete for her approval. "Your sister seems really sweet," Derek commented as we arranged the cupcakes on tiered stands. "And she's gorgeous. You guys look alike, but she has this kind of magnetic thing going on." Something cold settled in my stomach at his observation, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. "She's always been charismatic," I said carefully. "People are drawn to her." The shower officially began at noon, and I found myself taking on the role I'd always played in our family, the helper in the background who made sure everything ran smoothly while Madison basked in the spotlight.
I refilled drinks, replenished food platters, helped elderly relatives find comfortable seats, and made sure the photographer captured all the important moments. Derek, meanwhile, seemed increasingly fascinated by the event. He lingered near the gift opening area, laughing at Madison's reactions to each present and occasionally offering to help her with wrapping paper or ribbons. I told myself this was normal. He was just being polite and helpful at a family event. Derek's really gotten into the spirit of things, commented my Aunt Susan, Madison's mother-in-law, as we watched him hand Madison a glass of sparkling cider with extra care. I nodded and smiled, but something felt off about the way Derek was hovering around my sister. He'd positioned himself in her direct line of sight and seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. When she mentioned feeling warm, he immediately adjusted the air conditioning. When she commented on loving the mini cheesecakes, he brought her 2 more without being asked.
Madison, for her part, seemed to be encouraging his attention in subtle ways. She touched his arm when she thanked him for small favors, made eye contact when she laughed at his jokes, and included him in conversations with her friends in a way that made him seem like an important part of her inner circle rather than her sister's boyfriend. "Heather, come sit down and relax," Madison called out during the gift opening. "You've been running around taking care of everyone all day. Derek, bring her a chair." But when Derek approached with a chair, Madison patted the spot next to her on the love seat instead. "Actually, Derek, why don't you sit here and help me keep track of who gave what for the thank you notes? Heather's handwriting is terrible anyway." The comment stung, even though it was delivered with a laugh that made it seem like harmless teasing. Derek settled next to Madison without hesitation, pulling out his phone to start a list as she dictated gift details. They sat close together, their heads bent over his phone screen, and I noticed how Madison's hand occasionally brushed his arm as she pointed out specific items. I busied myself cleaning up wrapping paper and organizing gifts, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. This was Madison's day, I reminded myself. She was pregnant and deserving of attention and care. If Derek was being extra helpful, that just showed what a considerate person he was. But as the afternoon wore on, their interaction became increasingly intimate in ways that had nothing to do with gift organization. Madison would lean against Derek's shoulder when she laughed, her hand lingering on his knee when she made a point. Derek seemed mesmerized by her presence, hanging on her every word and responding to her subtle cues like they were old friends rather than people who had met only a few times. "Your boyfriend is such a sweetheart," Madison's best friend Caroline whispered to me as we watched Derek help Madison open a particularly challenging gift box. "Madison's lucky to have such attentive help today." The assumption that Derek was Madison's boyfriend rather than mine should have been shocking, but somehow it wasn't. The way they were interacting made more sense as a couple than Derek and I ever had. They seemed to communicate without words, to anticipate each other's needs, to exist in a bubble of mutual fascination that excluded everyone else. I spent the remainder of the shower feeling like a stranger at my own sister's event, watching the man I thought I loved fall under her spell in real time. By the time guests started leaving, Derek and Madison were exchanging phone numbers to coordinate thank you note details and making plans to grab coffee sometime to discuss baby gift recommendations for future showers. The drive home was silent except for Derek's enthusiastic commentary about how amazing Madison was, how natural she seemed as a soon-to-be mother, how lucky her husband was to have such an incredible wife. I responded with non-committal sounds and stared out the passenger window at the desert landscape, processing the reality that I had just watched my boyfriend fall in love with my sister. "Madison mentioned she'd love to get your recipe for those mini cheesecakes," Derek said as we pulled into my apartment complex. "Maybe I could bring them to her next week when we meet up to finish the thank you note project." The casual way he mentioned their planned meeting, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, confirmed what I'd suspected all afternoon. This wasn't about thank you notes or cheesecake recipes. This was about Derek finding reasons to spend time with Madison, and Madison encouraging those reasons. That night, as Derek showered in my bathroom and I cleaned up the remnants of cupcake making supplies from my kitchen, I realized that my 8-month relationship was effectively over. Not because Derek had officially ended things, but because he'd discovered something with Madison that he'd never found with me.
The easy chemistry, the natural compatibility, the magnetic pull that made two people want to be in each other's presence. I should have been devastated. I should have been planning confrontations and demanding explanations and fighting for my relationship. Instead, I felt something unexpected: relief. Watching Derek and Madison together had shown me what real connection looked like, and it was nothing like what Derek and I had shared. We'd been settling for comfort and familiarity, mistaking habit for love. But what I didn't know that night, as I lay awake listening to Derek's contented breathing beside me, was that losing him would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. Sometimes the universe clears away what's wrong to make room for what's right, and what was coming would make Derek's betrayal look like a blessing in disguise.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The breakup happened 3 days later in my living room, with Derek sitting on the edge of my couch looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. He'd been distant since the baby shower, checking his phone constantly and seeming distracted during conversations. I'd caught him smiling at text messages he quickly closed when I walked into the room. "Heather, we need to talk," he said, the words every girlfriend dreads hearing. His hands were clasped tightly in his lap, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Sunday, and I don't think this is working anymore." I sat across from him in the armchair I'd bought when we first started dating, back when I thought we might be building something permanent together. "Is this about Madison?" I asked quietly. His face flushed red, which was answer enough. "It's not what you think. Nothing inappropriate happened. But being around her made me realize that what you and I have it's not what I want long term." "What you and I have," I repeated slowly. "You mean 8 months of dating, sleeping together, meeting each other's families, and making plans for the future?" I know this is hard to understand, but sometimes you meet someone and everything just clicks in a way it never has before. Madison and I have this connection that's... He trailed off, finally realizing how terrible he sounded. "That's what, Derek? Finish that sentence." He looked at me then, and I saw something in his expression that hurt more than the breakup itself: pity. He felt sorry for me because I wasn't Madison, because I didn't possess whatever magical quality had captivated him so completely in the span of a single afternoon. "She understands me in a way that feels natural and effortless. When we talk, it's like we've known each other for years. And I know she's married and pregnant, and I'm not trying to break up her family, but I can't keep pretending I feel the same way about you when I know what real connection feels like now." The audacity of his statement was breathtaking. He was ending our relationship because he'd fallen for my married, pregnant sister, but he wanted me to understand and sympathize with his emotional journey. He wanted absolution for breaking my heart because he'd discovered true love with someone completely unavailable. "Get out," I said calmly. "Heather, please don't be like this. I'm trying to be honest with you instead of stringing you along. I thought you'd appreciate..." I said, "Get out, now." After Derek left, taking his few belongings and his wounded feelings with him, I called in sick to work and spent 2 days in my pajamas eating ice cream and watching romantic comedies. Not because I was devastated about losing Derek, I'd been right about feeling relieved, but because I was processing the betrayal by my sister. Madison called on Thursday evening, her voice bright and cheerful as if nothing had happened. "Hey, Heather, I wanted to thank you again for all your hard work on Sunday. The desserts were absolutely perfect, and everyone's still talking about those mini cheesecakes." "You're welcome," I said neutrally. "I also wanted to let you know that Derek stopped by yesterday to drop off some baby gift recommendations he'd researched. He mentioned that you two had decided to take a break from dating. I'm sorry things didn't work out. Breakups are always hard." The casual way she delivered this information, as if she were commenting on the weather, confirmed that she knew exactly what had happened and felt no guilt about her role in it. Derek hadn't stopped by with gift recommendations. He'd come to see her because she'd given him a reason to. "Madison, did you encourage Derek to break up with me?" "What? Heather, that's a crazy question. Why would I interfere in your relationship? Because you spent an entire afternoon flirting with my boyfriend and making plans to see him again. There was a pause before Madison responded, and when she spoke again, her tone had shifted to the patient voice she used when explaining obvious things to slow children. Heather, I think you might be misinterpreting some friendly interactions. Derek was being helpful at my baby shower, and I was grateful for his assistance. If he made the decision to end your relationship, that's between you and him. You gave him your phone number? For thank you note coordination, which we did complete, by the way, very efficiently. And the coffee date you planned? Baby gift consultation. As someone who might be attending future baby showers, he wanted guidance on appropriate gifts. I was happy to help since I just went through the experience myself. Every explanation was technically reasonable and completely believable to anyone who hadn't witnessed the subtle seduction I observed. Madison had been careful not to cross any obvious lines, while still creating an atmosphere of intimacy and possibility. She'd made Derek feel special and desired without doing anything that could be called overtly inappropriate. I saw how you two were together, Madison. The touching, the eye contact, the way you made him feel like the most important person in the room. I don't know what you think you saw, but I'm 7 months pregnant with another man's baby. I'm not interested in your ex-boyfriend romantically, and frankly, I'm hurt that you'd accuse me of something so awful when all I did was be friendly to someone you brought to my baby shower. The conversation ended with Madison expressing disappointment in my accusations and me feeling like I was losing my mind. She'd managed to make me sound paranoid and vindictive while positioning herself as the innocent victim of my jealousy and insecurity. 2 weeks later, I learned through my mother that Madison and Derek were spending time together as friends, while Madison navigated the emotional challenges of late pregnancy. Mom presented this information as evidence of what a supportive person Derek was, apparently unaware that he'd broken up with her other daughter to pursue this friendship. It's so sweet how Derek has become like a big brother to Madison, Mom said during our weekly phone call. He's been helping her with errands and keeping her company while Brad's traveling for work. Some men would be intimidated by a pregnant woman's needs, but Derek is mature enough to offer genuine friendship. The narrative Madison had crafted was brilliant in its simplicity. Derek wasn't pursuing a married pregnant woman, he was providing platonic support during a vulnerable time. Their growing closeness wasn't romantic, it was the natural result of a caring person helping someone in need. Anyone who suggested otherwise was obviously jealous and small-minded. I threw myself into work at the marketing firm where I'd been employed for 3 years, staying late on projects and volunteering for weekend assignments that kept me too busy to think about Derek and Madison's evolving friendship. My colleagues noticed my increased dedication and began including me in higher-level meetings and strategic planning sessions. It was during one of these late-night work sessions that I met Captain Jake Morrison. The firm was pitching a recruitment campaign for the Navy, and Jake had been brought in as a military liaison to ensure authenticity in our messaging. He was everything Derek wasn't. Confident without being arrogant, focused and decisive, with an intensity that suggested he'd seen real challenges and emerged stronger. At 32, Jake had the kind of rugged attractiveness that came from physical conditioning and life experience, rather than good genetics and careful grooming. His dark hair was cut military short, his green eyes held intelligence and humor, and when he spoke, people listened because he clearly had something worth saying. The campaign needs to appeal to people who want more than just a job, he said. Military service offers purpose, brotherhood, and the chance to be part of something bigger than yourself. But it also requires sacrifice, discipline, and the willingness to put others before yourself. Your messaging needs to reflect both the rewards and the reality. I found myself staying after meetings ended, asking questions about military life and listening to stories about deployments and training that revealed a world completely different from my civilian experience. Jake had joined the Navy at 18, worked his way up through the ranks, and became a SEAL through sheer determination and an unwillingness to quit when things got difficult. What made you want to become a SEAL? I asked during one of our planning sessions that had evolved into something resembling a dinner date. I wanted to be part of the best team, working with people who would never let you down when it mattered. In the SEALs, your teammates are willing to die for you, and you for them. That level of trust and commitment creates bonds that civilian life can't replicate. His description of military brotherhood made me think about family bonds and how some were stronger than blood relationships. Jake had chosen his family based on shared values and mutual respect, while I'd been born into one where loyalty was conditional and love came with hidden costs. Our professional relationship gradually became personal as we discovered shared interests in hiking, cooking, and old movies. Jake approached dating the same way he approached missions, with careful planning, clear communication, and genuine interest in understanding what made me tick. He asked questions about my work, my goals, my family, and actually listened to the answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. "Tell me about your sister," he said one evening as we walked through the Phoenix Desert Botanical Garden, surrounded by cacti and desert wildflowers blooming in the cooler October weather. I found myself explaining the complicated dynamics of my relationship with Madison, the baby shower incident, and Derek's subsequent departure from my life. Jake listened without interrupting, asking clarifying questions that showed he was processing the emotional subtleties rather than just the surface details. "Your sister sounds like someone who's used to getting what she wants through manipulation rather than direct action," he said when I finished. "And your ex-boyfriend sounds like someone who never learned the difference between wanting something and deserving it." "That's a harsh assessment," I said, though privately I agreed with him. "Maybe, but in my experience, people who can't maintain loyalty during easy times won't be there when things get difficult. Your sister sabotaged your relationship for entertainment, and your boyfriend abandoned ship the moment he thought he saw something better. Neither of those people had your back when it mattered." The simple clarity of his perspective was refreshing after weeks of self-doubt and second-guessing my own perceptions. Jake saw the situation exactly as it had been, a betrayal by two people who should have protected my feelings instead of pursuing their own desires at my expense. What I didn't know then was that Jake's assessment of Madison's character would prove more accurate than I could have imagined, and that his protective instincts would soon be put to the test in ways that would change everything. Madison's baby arrived on a cold December morning, 2 weeks early and weighing 6 pounds 3 ounces. Emma Rose was perfectly healthy, with Madison's auburn hair and Brad's blue eyes. I learned about the birth through a group text message that included extended family and close friends, treating me like any other acquaintance rather than the baby's aunt. The message included professional photos from the hospital, showing Madison glowing in a silk hospital gown while holding Emma, Brad looking proud and exhausted beside the bed, and Derek sitting in the corner chair with a massive flower arrangement he'd apparently brought to celebrate the occasion. The inclusion of Derek in the family birth announcement photos struck me as bizarre, but by then I'd learned not to question Madison's choices publicly. Jake and I had been dating for 2 months at that point, and our relationship had developed into something deeper and more stable than anything I'd experienced before. He approached love the same way he approached military operations, with commitment, strategic thinking, and absolute reliability. When he said he would call, he called. When he made plans, he kept them. When he told me something, I could trust it completely. "Your sister had her baby," I told him that evening as we cooked dinner together in his apartment, a neat space filled with military memorabilia and photographs of his SEAL team in various international locations. "Congratulations, Aunt Heather," he said, stirring the pasta sauce while I chopped vegetables for salad. "Are you planning to visit them in the hospital?" I wasn't specifically invited. The text message just announced that Emma had arrived safely and visiting hours were limited to immediate family. Jake paused in his stirring and looked at me with the expression he wore when processing tactical information. "You're the baby's biological aunt. How are you not an immediate family?" Madison has her own definition of family, and it doesn't always include people who might complicate her narrative. The next morning brought a call from my mother, who was practically vibrating with excitement about her new granddaughter. "Heather, you absolutely must come to the hospital today. Emma is the most beautiful baby I've ever seen, and Madison looks incredible for someone who just gave birth. Derek brought the most gorgeous flowers, and he's been so helpful with everything." The casual mention of Derek's continued presence in Madison's life, particularly during such an intimate family moment, confirmed what I'd suspected for months.
He wasn't just providing friendly support during pregnancy, he'd become an integral part of Madison's inner circle, possibly more integral than her own sister. Mom, don't you think it's strange that Derek is at the hospital when Madison's husband and actual family should be the priority right now? Derek has been such a support system for Madison throughout her pregnancy. Brad's been traveling so much for work, and Madison needed someone reliable she could count on. Derek stepped up when family couldn't always be there. The implied criticism stung because it contained a grain of truth. I hadn't been available to Madison during her pregnancy, but that was largely because she'd made it clear that Derek's support was more welcome than mine. She'd gradually replaced family relationships with the adoration of someone who saw her as perfect and unattainable. Jake drove me to the hospital that afternoon, his presence providing the emotional support I needed to face what I suspected would be an uncomfortable family gathering. The maternity ward was decorated with Christmas lights and paper snowflakes, creating a festive atmosphere that felt at odds with my growing anxiety. Madison's private room was filled with flowers, balloons, and visitors when we arrived. Brad was holding Emma, while Madison received compliments on her post-birth appearance from a steady stream of friends and relatives. Derek sat beside Madison's bed, looking completely at home in the intimate family setting, occasionally offering commentary on baby care techniques he'd apparently researched extensively. "Heather," Madison called out when she spotted me in the doorway, "come meet your beautiful niece. And this must be Jake. I've heard so much about you." The warm greeting was performed for the audience, but I caught the assessing look Madison gave Jake as he approached to congratulate her. She was evaluating him the same way she'd evaluated Derek, measuring his attractiveness, his potential usefulness, his susceptibility to her charm. Jake shook hands with Brad, politely admired the baby, and offered appropriate congratulations, but I noticed he positioned himself slightly behind me rather than engaging directly with Madison's attempts to draw him into conversation. His military training had taught him to assess threats quickly, and something about Madison had triggered his protective instincts. "Jake, Derek was just telling us about military recruitment statistics," Madison said, her voice carrying the sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "He's been researching different branches of service and finds the Navy particularly fascinating. Maybe you could give him some insider perspective on what military life is really like." The request was reasonable on the surface, but I recognized Madison's technique of creating connections between people she wanted to influence. She was testing whether Jake would be as susceptible to her attention as Derek had been, while simultaneously positioning Derek as someone worthy of Jake's time and respect.
Military life requires certain character traits that can't be taught, Jake replied diplomatically. Discipline, loyalty, and the willingness to put mission and teammates before personal desires. Not everyone is suited for that level of commitment. His response was polite, but carried an edge that suggested he'd already assessed Derek's character and found it lacking. Derek, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the subtle criticism and launched into questions about SEAL training but demonstrated he'd been researching Jake's background extensively. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Madison orchestrating interactions while holding court from her hospital bed. She managed to make everyone feel included while maintaining herself as the central focus, a skill I'd watched her perfect since childhood. But I noticed that Jake's responses became increasingly brief and formal as the visit progressed. "We should let you rest," I said finally, kissing Madison's cheek and admiring Emma one last time before we left. The baby was genuinely beautiful, with perfect features and the serene expression of someone who'd been welcomed into the world with joy and celebration. In the elevator down to the parking garage, Jake was quiet in a way that suggested he was processing what he'd observed. I'd learned to recognize his different types of silence: contemplative, analytical, or concerned, and this felt like all three combined. "What did you think?" I asked as we walked to his truck. "Your sister is very beautiful and charming," he said carefully, "and Derek seems completely devoted to her. But watching them together felt like watching someone play with fire while standing in a room full of gasoline. The dynamic between them isn't sustainable, and when it explodes, innocent people are going to get hurt." His assessment crystallized concerns I'd been unable to articulate.
Madison and Derek's relationship existed in a bubble of plausible deniability, technically appropriate because she was married and he was just a helpful friend, but emotionally intimate in ways that crossed unspoken boundaries. They were playing a dangerous game while pretending it was an innocent friendship. Do you think they're having an affair? I think they're having an emotional affair that will become physical the moment opportunity and justification align. Your sister gets attention and validation from someone who worships her, and Derek gets to feel special and needed by someone he sees as perfect. Neither of them is considering the consequences for the people around them. Over the following weeks, Derek's involvement in Madison's life became even more prominent. He helped with middle-of-the-night grocery runs when the baby needed formula, he assembled furniture for the nursery that Brad hadn't had time to complete, he brought Madison coffee from her favorite shop when she was too tired to leave the house. Each act of service was individually reasonable and helpful, but collectively they painted a picture of Derek functioning as Madison's secondary partner while Brad worked long hours to support his new family. Derek had inserted himself into intimate domestic moments that should have belonged to Madison and her husband. Derek practically lives at Madison's house now, my mother reported during one of our weekly calls. He's been such a blessing during this transition period. Madison says she doesn't know how she would have managed without him. The situation crystallized during Emma's baptism in January, when Derek was invited to stand as one of the godparents alongside Madison's best friend Caroline. The ceremony took place at the same church where Madison had been married 2 years earlier, creating an uncomfortable parallel between Derek's prominent role in Emma's life and Brad's diminishing presence in his own family's milestones. Jake attended the baptism as my date, observing the family dynamics with the tactical awareness of someone trained to identify threats and vulnerabilities. He watched Derek hold Emma during the ceremony while Brad took photographs. He noticed how Madison's attention was divided between her husband and Derek, often choosing to share meaningful moments with Derek while Brad handled practical responsibilities. "This isn't going to end well," Jake said quietly, as we watched Derek and Madison pose for photos with Emma after the ceremony, looking for all the world like a happy family unit. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your sister has created a situation where she gets the emotional support and attention she wants from Derek while maintaining the financial security and social respectability of marriage to Brad. But triangles like this always collapse eventually, and when they do, the fallout affects everyone in the blast radius." His prediction proved accurate sooner than either of us expected. The explosion came not from Derek and Madison finally acknowledging their feelings for each other, but from an entirely different direction that would force everyone to confront the reality of what their friendship had become. And when that moment arrived, Jake's protective instincts and military training would transform him from an observer of family drama into an active participant in resolving it. The confrontation that would change everything began with a seemingly innocent Facebook post. It was late February, and I was scrolling through social media during my lunch break when I saw photos from what appeared to be a romantic dinner at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown that required reservations weeks in advance. The images showed Madison and Derek sitting across from each other at a candlelit table, Emma sleeping peacefully in her carrier beside them. Madison looked radiant in an emerald green dress that complemented her post-pregnancy figure perfectly, while Derek wore the kind of satisfied smile of a man who felt he'd won something valuable. The caption read, "Perfect evening with my favorite people. So grateful for friends who make ordinary moments feel special." What made the post particularly damaging wasn't just the obvious romantic atmosphere, but the comments from Madison's friends and relatives, who seemed to view Derek as her partner rather than a family friend. "You two look so happy together," wrote her cousin Jennifer. "Derek is such a keeper," added her former college roommate. Even more concerning was my mother's comment, "Beautiful family dinner. Derek, you're such a blessing to Madison and Emma."
I screenshot the post and sent it to Jake, who was currently deployed on a training exercise in Virginia. His response came back within hours. "This isn't friendship anymore. They're publicly presenting as a couple while her husband is working to support them. Someone needs to address this before it destroys more lives." Brad's absence from the photos and comments wasn't accidental. According to family conversations, he'd been taking on increasingly demanding projects that required extended travel, ostensibly to provide better financial security for his growing family. But Jake had pointed out that Brad's frequent absences also conveniently allowed Derek and Madison to function as a domestic unit without awkward questions. The situation reached a breaking point the following weekend during Emma's 3-month photo shoot. Madison had hired a professional photographer to capture Emma's milestone, and the session was scheduled for Saturday morning at Papago Park. I learned about it through another group text that included logistics for family members who wanted to attend. Jake was back from his training exercise, and we decided to go support Madison despite our concerns about the underlying dynamics. The photo shoot was elaborate, with multiple outfit changes for Emma, carefully coordinated backdrops utilizing the desert landscape, and professional lighting equipment that suggested this was more than a casual family milestone documentation. What we discovered at the park was a scene that looked more like an engagement shoot than a baby photo shoot. Derek was positioned in most of the family photos, holding Emma while Madison gazed at both of them with the expression typically reserved for proud mothers photographing their partners with their children. Brad was noticeably absent, though Madison explained to anyone who asked that he was dealing with a work emergency that couldn't be postponed. Derek, move a little closer to Madison, the photographer directed during one setup. Perfect. Now, Madison, look at Derek like he just said something that made you laugh. Beautiful. Emma, you're being such a good girl for Daddy Derek. The photographer's casual reference to Derek as Daddy Derek sent shockwaves through the family members present. My Aunt Susan exchanged a meaningful look with my Uncle Robert. My mother's expression shifted from cheerful support to uncomfortable confusion. Even Madison's mother-in-law, who had driven down from Flagstaff for the occasion, seemed startled by the implication. But Madison didn't correct the photographer. Instead, she smiled more brightly and positioned herself even closer to Derek, creating the visual impression of a nuclear family unit that included Derek as the father figure and relegated Brad to irrelevance. I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said to the photographer during a break between setups. Derek isn't Emma's father, he's a family friend. The photographer looked confused, glancing between Derek and Madison for clarification. Oh, I'm sorry. Madison introduced him as her partner when we discussed the shoot details, so I assumed he was the baby's father. Madison had introduced Derek as her partner to a professional photographer, creating a formal record of how she viewed their relationship. This wasn't an accidental misunderstanding or a slip of the tongue. It was a deliberate misrepresentation of her family structure that positioned Derek as her primary relationship while erasing Brad from the narrative. After the photographer packed up his equipment and the extended family dispersed with awkward goodbyes, Jake approached Derek directly. I watched from a distance as my husband-to-be, we'd gotten engaged the previous month, used his military bearing to have what appeared to be a very serious conversation with the man who had systematically inserted himself into my sister's marriage. What did you say to Derek? I asked as we drove home, noting that Derek had left immediately after their conversation without the usual extended goodbye with Madison. I told him that what he's doing has a name, alienation of affection, and that in some states it's grounds for a civil lawsuit. I also mentioned that military personnel take a dim view of people who destroy families for personal gratification. You threatened him? I educated him. Derek seems to think this situation exists in a consequence-free bubble where he can play house with another man's wife without anyone getting hurt. I helped him understand that reality works differently. Jake's intervention had immediate effects. Derek's constant presence of Madison's house decreased noticeably over the following week. His social media posts stopped featuring Madison and Emma. The stream of helpful errands and domestic assistance slowed to a trickle. Madison's response to Derek's withdrawal was swift and dramatic. She called me on Thursday evening, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Heather, I don't know what Jake said to Derek, but he's been acting strange all week. He's canceling plans, not returning texts, and generally being cold and distant. Did your fiancé threaten him? The fact that she called Jake my fiancé rather than using his name suggested she was angry but trying to maintain plausible deniability about her own feelings. Jake had a conversation with Derek about appropriate boundaries. Maybe Derek realized he'd been crossing some lines. What lines? Derek has been nothing but supportive during a difficult time in my life. Brad's been traveling constantly, I'm dealing with postpartum challenges, and Derek stepped up to help when my own family couldn't be bothered. The accusation that the family hadn't been supportive was rich coming from someone who had systematically excluded family members in favor of maintaining her inappropriate relationship with Derek. But I recognized Madison's strategy. When confronted with the consequences of her actions, she positioned herself as the victim of other people's jealousy and mean-spiritedness. Madison, you introduced Derek to a photographer as your partner. You've been functioning as a couple in everything but name, while your husband works to support you and Emma. That's not friendship. That's an emotional affair that was heading towards something more serious. I have never done anything inappropriate with Derek. We're friends, and if other people want to read more into that, that's their problem, not mine. But even as Madison denied any impropriety, her distress about Derek's withdrawal revealed the emotional investment she'd made in their relationship. She wasn't upset about losing a helpful friend, she was devastated about losing someone who had made her feel desired and special in ways her marriage apparently didn't provide. The situation escalated further when Brad returned from his latest business trip and discovered the professional photos from Emma's shoot. According to my mother, who heard the details from Madison's mother-in-law, Brad was shocked to see Derek featured so prominently in what he'd assumed would be family portraits celebrating his daughter's milestones. The confrontation between Brad and Madison had behind closed doors, but the aftermath was visible to anyone paying attention. Brad hired a babysitter and took Madison out for what they announced as a romantic dinner to reconnect after his travels. Derek was conspicuously absent from social media posts about the evening, and Madison's usual stream of photos featuring her daily activities stopped entirely.
For a brief moment, it seemed like Jake's intervention had succeeded in restoring appropriate boundaries and saving Madison's marriage before irreparable damage was done. Derek was maintaining distance, Brad was reasserting his role as husband and father, and Madison was forced to confront the reality of what her friendship had become. But Jake had warned me that people like Madison don't accept defeat gracefully, and that Derek's withdrawal would likely trigger escalation rather than acceptance. His prediction proved accurate in ways that would test every assumption I had about family loyalty and the lengths people will go to protect their self-image when confronted with uncomfortable truths about their behavior. Madison's retaliation began subtly, the way most of her manipulations did, with plausible deniability and just enough truth to make her accusations seem reasonable. It started with a phone call to my mother 3 days after Brad had confronted her about the photo shoot situation. "Mom, I'm really concerned about Heather's relationship with Jake," Madison said, during what my mother later described as a tearful conversation. "I think he might be controlling her and isolating her from family. The way he threatened Derek was completely inappropriate, and now Heather seems afraid to disagree with him about anything." The seeds of doubt Madison planted were expertly chosen. Jake was military, which some people associated with rigid control and authoritarian behavior. He was protective of me, which could be reframed as possessive. He had confronted Derek directly rather than going through family channels, which could be characterized as aggressive and intimidating. My mother called me that evening with carefully worded questions about my relationship that initially seemed like normal maternal concern. "Heather, honey, you seem different lately, more serious, less spontaneous. I just want to make sure you're happy and that Jake isn't putting pressure on you to change who you are." "I'm happier than I've ever been, Mom. Jake supports my goals and treats me with respect. Why are you asking?" Madison mentioned that Jake was quite harsh with Derek, and she's worried that he might have similar expectations for you. Military men sometimes have very rigid ideas about how relationships should work. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Mom probing about Jake's opinions on my career, my friendships, my family relationships, and my future plans. Each question was framed as concern for my well-being, but the cumulative effect was to create doubt about whether Jake was the right person for me. "Has Jake ever told you not to see certain people or made you feel guilty about spending time with family?" Mom asked. "No, Mom. Jake encourages me to maintain all my relationships. The only person he's had concerns about is Derek, and that's because Derek was actively undermining someone else's marriage." But don't you think it's strange that Jake felt he had the right to interfere in Madison's friendships? That seems like something a family should handle internally rather than having an outsider issue ultimatums. The reframing was masterful. Jake had gone from being my fiancé and a concerned family member to an outsider who was interfering and issuing ultimatums. Madison had managed to position herself as the victim of Jake's aggression while completely erasing her own role in creating the situation. The campaign against Jake escalated over the following weeks. Madison began sharing carefully selected stories about military marriages that had failed due to the stress of deployment, the challenges of military life, and the difficulty of maintaining civilian relationships when one partner was trained for combat situations. I read this article about how divorce rates are higher in military families, she mentioned during a family dinner that Jake was attending. The lifestyle is just so demanding, and it's hard for civilians to understand the mentality. Plus, there's always the risk that deployments will change someone's personality in ways that affect their ability to maintain intimate relationships. Jake listened to these comments with the same controlled expression he wore during tactical briefings, processing information and cataloging threats without emotional reaction. But I could see the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated he understood exactly what Madison was doing. Every relationship faces challenges, he replied calmly. Military marriages require clear communication and mutual commitment, but they also build strength through shared adversity. The key is choosing a partner who shares your values and supports your mission rather than undermining it. His response was diplomatic, but carried an edge that suggested he was drawing comparisons between supportive partnerships and destructive ones. Madison caught the implication, and her smile became slightly strained as she realized her subtle attacks weren't landing the way she'd intended. The situation took a more serious turn when Madison began reaching out to my friends and colleagues with expressions of concern about my relationship. She contacted my best friend from college, Sarah, who lived in Denver and only knew about Jake through my exciting descriptions over the phone. "I'm worried about Heather," Madison told Sarah during a call that Sarah later reported to me. "She's become so focused on this military guy that she's lost touch with who she used to be. Jake seems to have very strong opinions about everything, and Heather just goes along with whatever he thinks. It's like she's afraid to disagree with him." Sarah, who had known me for 8 years and understood my personality, was skeptical of Madison's concerns. Heather has never been someone who lets other people control her decisions. If anything, she's usually too independent for her own good. Are you sure you're not misreading the situation? But Madison persisted, sharing selective examples of Jake's behavior that painted him as domineering and potentially dangerous. She mentioned his confrontation with Derek, his military training, his protective instincts, and his influence over my social activities, all framed as evidence of concerning patterns rather than normal relationship dynamics. The most damaging aspect of Madison's campaign was how she used partial truths to support false conclusions. Jake was protective, but out of love, not control. He had strong opinions, but he respected mine when they differed. He had confronted Derek, but to protect a marriage, not to assert dominance. By the time I learned about Madison's conversations with my friends and extended family, she'd managed to plant doubts about Jake's character with dozens of people who cared about my well-being. The narrative she'd created positioned her as the concerned sister trying to save me from an abusive relationship, while casting Jake as a potentially dangerous man who was isolating me from my support system. "We need to address this directly," Jake said when I told him about the rumors Madison was spreading. "She's conducting a disinformation campaign designed to destroy our relationship and my reputation. If we don't respond strategically, she'll succeed in turning your entire family against me." Jake's military background had taught him to recognize psychological warfare when he encountered it. Madison wasn't just gossiping or expressing concerns. She was executing a deliberate plan to eliminate the threat Jake posed to her preferred narrative about the Derek situation. "What kind of strategic response?" I asked, though part of me was afraid of the answer. Jake's methods had been effective with Derek, but they'd also escalated the conflict with Madison in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. We document everything, record conversations, save text messages, gather witnesses who can contradict her false claims. Then we present the evidence to key family members in a way that exposes her manipulation without making us look vindictive. The idea of treating my sister like an enemy combatant felt surreal, but Jake's assessment of the situation was proving accurate. Madison wasn't going to stop her campaign until she'd either destroyed our relationship or been definitively defeated in her attempts to do so. Our first piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Derek, who had been maintaining his distance from Madison since Jake's intervention, reached out to me through LinkedIn with a message that confirmed many of our suspicions about Madison's behavior and motivations. Heather, I know this situation has been difficult for everyone involved, and I want you to know that I never intended for things to get so complicated. Madison has been calling me constantly since I stepped back from our friendship, and some of the things she's saying about Jake are concerning. She's asked me to support her claims that he's controlling and potentially abusive, but I can't do that because it's not true. Jake was direct with me about crossing boundaries, but he wasn't threatening or inappropriate. I think you should know that Madison is actively trying to recruit people to support false narratives about your relationship. Derek's message was a game changer because it came from someone who had been intimately involved in the original conflict and had firsthand knowledge of Madison's current tactics. His willingness to contradict her version of events provided credible evidence that she was lying about Jake's behavior and motivations. But even more importantly, Derek's message revealed that Madison's campaign against Jake wasn't motivated by genuine concern for my well-being. It was revenge for having her inappropriate relationship with Derek exposed and disrupted. She was trying to destroy my happiness because Jake had prevented her from destroying Brad's marriage. This changes the dynamic significantly, Jake said after reading Derek's message. Now we have proof that she's deliberately spreading false information for vindictive purposes rather than legitimate family concerns. We can use this to expose her pattern of manipulation. What neither of us anticipated was how far Madison would be willing to escalate when her initial tactics failed to achieve the desired results. The campaign against Jake was just the beginning of a much more comprehensive plan to regain control of the family narrative and eliminate anyone who threatened her ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. Madison's escalation reached dangerous territory the week before Jake's scheduled deployment to Norfolk for advanced training exercises. What had started as whispered concerns about his character evolved into something that could have destroyed his military career and our future together. The attack came through an anonymous complaint filed with Jake's commanding officer, alleging that he had used his military position to intimidate civilian contractors and exhibited patterns of aggressive behavior toward non-military personnel. The complaint specifically referenced his threats against Derek and described a pattern of controlling behavior that raised questions about his fitness for duty. Commander Patricia Valdez called Jake into her office on a Tuesday morning, presenting him with a formal letter outlining the allegations and informing him that an investigation would be conducted before his deployment could proceed. Jake returned home that evening with the kind of controlled fury I'd learned to recognize as his response to injustice. "Someone filed a complaint alleging I've been using my position to intimidate civilians," he said, handing me the official documentation. The allegations are specific enough that they had to come from someone with detailed knowledge of the Derek situation. Reading through the complaint was like seeing our private family drama filtered through the lens of military regulations and professional conduct standards. Every interaction Jake had with Derek was reframed as an abuse of power. His protective instincts toward me were characterized as controlling behavior. His direct communication style was presented as evidence of aggressive tendencies that could compromise his effectiveness as a SEAL. "This could end my career," Jake said quietly. "If the investigation concludes that I've been using my military status inappropriately, I could face disciplinary action, loss of security clearance, and potential discharge." The anonymous nature of the complaint made it impossible to directly confront the accuser, but the specific details included could only have come from Madison. She was the only person outside our immediate relationship who knew enough about Jake's interactions with Derek to construct such a detailed allegation.
We need to prove Madison filed this complaint, I said, though I wasn't sure how to accomplish that without access to military investigation procedures. We need to prove the allegations are false, Jake corrected. The source matters less than the substance. If I can demonstrate that my actions were appropriate and justified, the complaint will be dismissed regardless of who filed it. Jake's systematic approach to defending himself revealed the strategic thinking that had made him successful in military operations. He gathered character references from fellow SEALs, documented the timeline of events surrounding the Derrick situation, and collected evidence that his intervention had been necessary to prevent further damage to Brad and Madison's marriage. But Madison had anticipated this defensive strategy. 3 days after Jake received notice of the investigation, she escalated again by contacting my employer with concerns about my deteriorating emotional state and suggestions that I might be experiencing domestic abuse that was affecting my work performance. Human Resources Director Angela Chen called me into her office on Friday afternoon with an expression of genuine concern mixed with professional obligation. "Heather, we received a call from someone identifying herself as your sister, expressing worry about your well-being and suggesting that you might be in an abusive relationship that could be impacting your work." The conversation that followed was simultaneously humiliating and enlightening. Madison had provided HR with specific examples of changes in my behavior that could indicate domestic abuse. Increased focus on work, decreased social interactions, reluctance to discuss my personal life, and apparent anxiety about my partner's approval of my decisions. "I need to ask some direct questions," Angela said gently. "Has Jake ever threatened you, physically harmed you, or prevented you from maintaining relationships with friends and family?" "No, absolutely not. Jake has been nothing but supportive of my career and my relationships. The only conflict we've had with our family is about my sister's inappropriate relationship with another man, and Jake's concern was about protecting that man's marriage, not controlling my behavior." Angela listened carefully as I explained the actual situation, taking notes that would become part of an official file documenting the false allegations. "Heather, I need you to understand that we take these reports seriously, even when they come from third parties. However, based on my observations of your work performance and demeanor, I see no evidence of the concerning changes your sister described." The fact that Madison had escalated to contacting my employer revealed the extent of her desperation to destroy my relationship with Jake. She was willing to jeopardize my professional reputation and create official documentation of domestic abuse allegations that could follow me throughout my career. That weekend, Jake and I met with his military attorney, Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison, to discuss the anonymous complaint and develop a comprehensive defense strategy. Harrison was a career military lawyer with experience in cases involving civilian complaints against active duty personnel. "The allegations are serious but vague," Harrison explained, after reviewing the complaint. "Phrases like intimidating behavior and inappropriate use of military bearing are subjective interpretations that would be difficult to prove without concrete evidence of actual misconduct." Jake presented his documentation of the Derrick situation, including Derrick's LinkedIn message contradicting Madison's version of events, photographs from Emma's photo shoot showing Derrick positioned as a family member, and testimony from family members who had witnessed the inappropriate relationship dynamics. "Your intervention appears to have been justified based on the evidence of an extramarital affair that was threatening a military family's stability. Preventing the dissolution of military marriages falls within the scope of appropriate peer support, not misconduct." But even as we built Jake's defense, Madison was executing the final phase of her campaign. She reached out to Brad with a carefully crafted confession designed to destroy any remaining evidence of her inappropriate relationship with Derrick while positioning herself as the victim of Jake's intimidation. According to what Brad later told my mother, Madison admitted that Derrick had misinterpreted her friendship and become inappropriately attached to her and Emma. She claimed that Jake had threatened and intimidated Derrick into staying away, preventing her from gently correcting the misunderstanding in a way that would have preserved Derrick's dignity and their family relationships.
Madison's version of events transformed her from the instigator of an emotional affair into the innocent victim of unwanted attention who had been prevented from handling the situation appropriately by Jake's aggressive intervention. She managed to acknowledge the inappropriate nature of Derek's behavior while completely erasing her own role in encouraging and enabling it. The genius of this strategy was that it provided Brad with a narrative that allowed him to forgive Madison while directing his anger toward Jake for mishandling the situation. Instead of confronting his wife's betrayal, Brad could focus on resenting the outsider who had exposed problems in his marriage. Brad's call to me that Sunday evening was the angriest I'd ever heard him. "Heather, your boyfriend had no right to threaten Derek and interfere in our family's private business. Madison was handling the situation appropriately, and Jake's intervention made everything worse." "Brad, there are photos of Derek positioned as Emma's father. Madison introduced him to a photographer as her partner. That's not handling an inappropriate friendship. That's participating in it." Madison explained all of that. "Derek was helping Emma because I've been traveling for work." If there were misunderstandings about their relationship, Madison would have clarified them without outside interference.
The conversation revealed how effectively Madison had manipulated the narrative to protect herself while sacrificing Derek and Jake to preserve her marriage and reputation. She'd managed to convince Brad that she had been the victim of circumstances rather than an active participant in creating them. But Madison had made one critical error in her calculations. She had underestimated Jake's resources and his willingness to use them to protect both his career and our relationship. Military SEALs don't retreat when faced with psychological warfare. They adapt their tactics and launch counter-offensives designed to neutralize threats permanently. Jake's response to Madison's escalation would demonstrate exactly why targeting a Navy SEAL's family was a mistake that carried consequences far beyond anything she had anticipated. Jake's counteroffensive began with a phone call that changed everything. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Madison had filed the anonymous complaint against him, Jake contacted a private investigator named Marcus Torres, who specialized in digital forensics and had worked with military personnel on sensitive cases involving false allegations. "We need to establish a timeline of communications and document the pattern of escalating false accusations," Jake explained to Torres during their initial consultation. "My career is on the line, but more importantly, I need to protect my family from further attacks." Torres was a former military intelligence officer who understood both the stakes involved and the methods required to build an airtight case. Within 48 hours, he had traced the anonymous complaint to a public computer at the Scottsdale Public Library, accessed using Madison's library card on the day before the complaint was filed. But Torres discovered something far more damaging than just proof of Madison's authorship of the complaint. His investigation into her digital communications revealed a comprehensive record of her manipulation campaign, including saved drafts of emails to my employer, research into military disciplinary procedures, and text message conversations with Derek that contradicted every aspect of her revised narrative. "Your sister-in-law kept detailed records of her campaign against you," Torres reported to Jake during a meeting at our kitchen table. "She documented her strategy, timeline, and expected outcomes, like she was planning a business project. This level of premeditation transforms her actions from family drama into criminal harassment." The evidence Torres had gathered was devastating. Screenshots of Madison's text messages to Derek revealed her fury about Jake's intervention and her determination to destroy his military career the same way he destroyed my friendship. Emails to various family members showed coordinated messaging designed to isolate me from support systems. Most damaging were voice recordings of phone calls Madison had made to Derek, obtained from his phone with his consent, in which she explicitly outlined her plan to file false allegations against Jake. "I'm going to make sure that my military boyfriend learns what happens when you mess with my life," Madison had said in one recording. "I've researched his chain of command, and I know exactly what kind of allegations will trigger an investigation. By the time I'm finished, he'll be lucky if he can get a job as a security guard." Jake presented Torres's findings to Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who immediately recognized the implications for the military investigation.
This evidence proves the complaint was filed in bad faith, with intent to damage your career for personal reasons, Harrison said. We can not only dismiss the allegations, but also pursue charges against the complainant for filing false reports. But Jake had a different strategy in mind. I want to handle this through civilian channels first. My sister-in-law has committed crimes that extend beyond military jurisdiction, and I want her to face consequences that will prevent her from targeting other families in the future. The evidence Torres had gathered supported charges of criminal harassment, filing false police reports, defamation, and potentially conspiracy if Derek's involvement in providing information could be proven. Jake worked with a civilian attorney, Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in harassment cases involving military families. Your sister has engaged in a systematic campaign designed to destroy your marriage, your husband's career, and your professional reputation, Martinez explained during our consultation. The premeditated nature of her actions, combined with the false allegations to government agencies, elevates this beyond simple family conflict into criminal territory. The confrontation came exactly 2 weeks after Madison had filed the anonymous complaint. Jake, accompanied by attorney Martinez and a process server, arrived at Madison's house while Brad was at work and Derek was conspicuously absent. Emma was at daycare, ensuring that the legal proceedings wouldn't traumatize an innocent child. Madison answered the door wearing yoga clothes and the confident smile she used when she felt in control of a situation. Her expression shifted to confusion and then alarm as she recognized the formal nature of Jake's visit. Madison Coleman, the processor announced, you are being served with a cease and desist order, a civil lawsuit for defamation and harassment, and a criminal complaint for filing false reports with federal agencies. The documents outlined every aspect of Madison's campaign against us, supported by the digital evidence Torres had gathered. Her text messages, emails, phone recordings, and research into military disciplinary procedures were all included as exhibits demonstrating premeditated criminal behavior. This is ridiculous, Madison said, though her voice lacked its usual conviction. I was concerned about my sister's well-being. That's not criminal, that's family loyalty. Attorney Martinez stepped forward with the calm professionalism of someone who had handled hundreds of similar cases. Ms. Coleman, we have recordings of phone calls in which you explicitly state your intention to file false allegations against Captain Morrison in retaliation for his intervention in your extramarital affair. That's not family concern, that's criminal harassment. The color drained from Madison's face as she realized the extent of the evidence against her. Her carefully constructed narrative about protecting me from an abusive relationship collapsed when confronted with her own recorded words describing her revenge plot. We're prepared to pursue both civil and criminal charges, Martinez continued. However, Captain Morrison is willing to consider an alternative resolution if you're prepared to take immediate corrective action. Jake's terms were non-negotiable. Madison would retract all false allegations in writing to his commanding officer, my employer, and every family member and friend she had contacted. She would publicly acknowledge that her claims about abuse and controlling behavior were false. She would agree to a restraining order prohibiting contact with me, Jake, or anyone in our professional or personal networks. And she would seek professional counseling to address the underlying issues that had led to her destructive behavior.
If you refuse these terms or violate any aspect of the agreement, we will pursue maximum criminal penalties, Jake said. That includes federal charges for filing false reports with military agencies, which carry sentences of up to 5 years in federal prison. Madison's surrender was complete but not graceful. Over the following 48 hours, she sent retraction emails and letters that acknowledged her false allegations while attempting to minimize her culpability through claims of emotional distress and misunderstandings, but the damage to her reputation within our extended family was irreversible. The truth about Madison's manipulation campaign spread quickly through family networks, supported by the undeniable evidence of her recorded statements and documented lies. Family members who had initially been concerned about Jake's controlling behavior were horrified to learn they had been manipulated into supporting a vindictive campaign based on fabricated allegations.
Derek, faced with evidence of his participation in Madison's scheme, made the wise decision to relocate to Denver for a new job opportunity. His departure eliminated the source of temptation that had nearly destroyed Brad and Madison's marriage, though the underlying issues in their relationship remained unresolved. Brad's response to discovering the full extent of Madison's deception was swift and decisive. He filed for divorce within a month of the legal confrontation, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking primary custody of Emma based on Madison's demonstrated pattern of manipulative behavior that could negatively impact her daughter's development. The custody proceedings revealed additional evidence of Madison's character issues, including testimony from the photographer who had documented her misrepresentation of Derek as Emma's father figure. Family court judge Linda Rodriguez expressed concern about Madison's pattern of deception and manipulation that prioritizes personal desires over family stability and child welfare. Jake's military investigation was closed with a formal commendation for his professional handling of civilian relationship conflicts and recognition that his intervention had preserved military family stability in accordance with Navy values. His deployment to Norfolk proceeded as scheduled, with enhanced security clearances reflecting confidence in his character and judgment. 6 months later, Jake and I were married in a small ceremony at Papago Park, surrounded by his SEAL teammates, my genuine friends, and the family members who had stood by us throughout Madison's campaign. The guest list was smaller than originally planned, but every person present was someone who had proven their loyalty through actions rather than words. Emma was there too, brought by Brad, who had been awarded primary custody and had begun rebuilding his life of a single father. At 18 months old, she was walking and babbling, completely unaware of the adult drama that had surrounded her early life. Brad and I maintained a cordial relationship, focused on ensuring Emma would grow up knowing her aunt, despite her mother's choices. Madison wasn't invited to the wedding, though she sent a card with a generic congratulations message that made no reference to the events that had led to our estrangement. She had moved back in with our parents after the divorce, working part-time and attending court-mandated counseling sessions that were part of her custody agreement. "Do you think she learned anything from what happened?" I asked Jake during our honeymoon in Maui as we watched the sunset from our resort balcony. "People like Madison don't learn, they adapt," he said. "She'll be more careful about leaving evidence next time, but she won't change her fundamental approach to relationships. She'll always see other people as tools for getting what she wants, rather than individuals deserving respect." His assessment proved accurate. Within a year of our wedding, I learned through family gossip that Madison had begun dating her divorce attorney, a married man with children who was going through his own marital difficulties. The pattern was repeating itself with a new target, though hopefully with less devastating consequences for the families involved. But Madison's manipulation had taught me something valuable about the difference between the family you're born with and the family you choose. Jake's SEAL teammates had become brothers who would protect our relationship without being asked. My genuine friends had seen through Madison's lies and supported us during the crisis. Even Derek, despite his role in creating the original problem, had ultimately chosen honesty over continued deception. Our daughter was born 2 years later, healthy and beautiful, with Jake's green eyes and my stubborn chin. Grace Elizabeth Morrison came into the world surrounded by people who understood that family meant protection, loyalty, and unconditional support, not manipulation, competition, and conditional love. As I held Grace for the first time, with Jake beside me and his teammates sending congratulations from various deployments around the world, I realized that Madison's attempt to destroy our relationship had actually strengthened it in ways a normal courtship never could have. We had been tested by psychological warfare and emerged united, loyal, and absolutely certain about what we meant to each other. Sometimes the worst betrayals clear the path for the greatest blessings. Madison had stolen my boyfriend, but in doing so, she had made room for my soulmate. She had tried to destroy my marriage, but had only proven how strong our foundation really was. She had attempted to isolate me from family, but had helped me identify who my real family actually was. The war was over and love had won completely. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.